Everyone, thanks for stopping by. Today we'll be taking a look at the trailer that was recently shown to us yesterday about Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. This is so interesting and so fascinating. I've had so many people contact me over the last 24 hours asking me to take a look at this and to share my analysis and breakdown, particularly why this game looks so good compared to, say, for example, the upcoming Pokémon game, which doesn't really meet this level of visual presentation and visual appeal. So before we get started on today's video, I just want to thank all of you for supporting the channel and just having fun and having a laugh here with me. I'm a full-time games developer, but I'm here on the channel just to basically have fun and have a laugh with you guys. And if I can think of a funny joke, I'll share it with you. Now, I know that actually a number of you started out quite antagonistically towards the channel, where you were, disagreed with me on something I've said about gaming or the games industry, or you're angry at me because I've purchased all of the antique ties in your area and I've added them to my collection. But look, here's the good news, right? There's a strong chance that I'm not in your area, so you can actually go to shops that have old stuff and you can grab those old ties, embroidered paisley, things like that, stuff from the 60s and 70s are quite rare, and they're just cool, man. They're just cool. I've cleared out the area where I live in. I'm usually checking, the Salvation Army and Goodwill and Vinnie's and things like that, and trying to track down those old ties, because the new ties they make these days they're nice, but they're not the same. They're retro. There's a difference between retro and vintage. Retro is something that is new, that's trying to recreate the feeling of something old, or is inspired by the feeling of something that is old, whereas vintage is something that's genuinely old. Anyway, I know that a number of you were mad at me about that, but you know what? Go out there and look for your own ties. But I want to thank you for sticking around, because I know that a number of you started out quite antagonistically, but after we've had a talk and we've chatted a little bit, I know a number of you, we now see eye to eye, and now you're here just to hang out and have fun. And I'm so glad that we can keep things respectful and that we can see eye to eye. Even if we disagree on things, it's totally fine for us to disagree. I'm so glad that a number of you, even though you started out pretty angry at me, are sticking around, and now you're having a laugh with me and we're all just having fun together because we're enjoying games. And I'm so grateful for that. So I want to take a look at a few artistic techniques and some development techniques that I see implemented here that are really fantastic. I'm so impressed with what I see here in Metroid Prime 4, especially because it's running on the Nintendo Switch. Now, I am not 100% fully convinced that the footage that we see here recorded, I'm not 100% convinced that this is running on Switch hardware. I just see a number of indications that this is being recorded on the development environment, which would be the PC. I could be wrong, and that could come down to the compression that YouTube puts on these videos. It could be distorting things, but I'm just seeing a number of things that tell me that this is not running, the footage that we're seeing is not running on Switch hardware. That could be because they are still optimizing the game to run better on the Switch, and that they just, in the trailer, they want to show something that's running well, and so they're using the development environment. So I don't know the development team, I don't know anyone on there, but I would, if this is running on Switch hardware right now, then I would really like to meet you guys at a Texas Roadhouse, and we can have some burgers and drinks, because this is fantastic. I would love to talk to you about what you've done here. So really fantastic. Let's go ahead and get started. So right off the bat, I believe this is the area that we were shown 9 months ago in the reveal trailer. And back then, I actually wasn't convinced that this was going to run on Switch 1. I was so convinced it was going to run on Switch 2 because it looked a little too good. But then I just noticed a little trick that they implemented. I'm just going to go back to that reveal trailer really quick and I'll point something out. And before we do that, I'll just go ahead and morph ball my size down here so I'm not taking up so much space. And this is the moment, this is the trailer from 9 months ago, and this is why I believed it wasn't going to run on Switch. I thought this was going to be Switch 2, was this shot right here. We pan up and we see some environmental details, and I'll go ahead and make sure that the top screen here is fitted properly. This here, it is this environment here where I thought, no, absolutely not. The Switch will not handle an environment like this. Switch 2, absolutely yes. Switch, absolutely not. You have all this transparency here with the water. You have these particle systems to indicate a sense of fog. You have the foliage. And then you have a large environment. And I saw this area, I saw the trees, I saw that, and I thought, there's no way. You cannot have that kind of density detail and maintain that kind of performance. You have everything else going on there. And then I realized what they did. This is not modeled. These aren't trees. This isn't fully detailed. This is just a very simple mesh. It's low poly count. This is just a texture. See this here? These aren't actually trees. These aren't actually mountains. That's just a flat texture, which means this is really the only area that's modeled here. You have billboard cutouts, which are very easy to render. They don't have a high rendering cost, so these are basically just cardboard cutouts. And this here, if you have a look at that, it's all just a small piece of... This would probably be like a couple hundred polygons. So it doesn't have the same level of detail as this environment here, so that's not actually a real environment. It's telling here. These aren't actually trees, it's just a texture. It's pictures of trees, pictures of a rock wall, but it's integrated in the lighting so well. It catches the light the same way that all this is, of course, using normal maps and whatnot. And it's so convincing, and then of course everything back there. So I've seen this trailer like 10 times, and I never caught that. I just looked at it and I went, there's no way. There's absolutely no way this is running on Switch. But what this means, this is an indication of developers who know what you need to show and what you don't need to show. These are developers that absolutely understand how to show the player exactly what they need to see without costing too much on the rendering budget, and they know how to do that with style, and they know how to do that with an elegant solution that runs well on hardware. This is so fantastic. This is... I'm so impressed. I'm so impressed with this scene. And they use particle systems. This fog here does not rely on volumetric fog, which is very expensive to render. What they're doing is using particle systems which are easy to manage, but it also means you have a very bespoke control over where you put the fog. So it means you can put one particle specifically back here behind that, so it adds a sense of depth between the pieces of geometry. So it makes a scene feel bigger than it actually is, and it adds a sense of depth where there isn't really depth, but it's convincing the viewer that there is depth. It's brilliant. This scene here is a masterclass in visual communication and expression. So we'll go ahead and go back to the trailer from yesterday now. So I see a strong use of lens flares. Again, lens flares are a great way to contribute to the visual interest of a scene. If you don't have access to volumetric fog, you can rely on bloom, which adds a halo between light and dark pixels. And you can use lens flares to fake that, but you see we have that fog particle creeping around the corner. These are developers that understand perspective. They know where the player is going to be looking. They know where the camera will be. I have a strong feeling that these developers, I believe a number of them would have some photographic experience. They've done photography work. I believe that from what we're seeing, this does actually use volumetric fog. And again, volumetric fog is a rendering technique that allows us to simulate a sense of atmospheric depth. We can simulate moisture or dust particles in the air. And we used to fake that. There's a number of techniques you can use to sort of create that sense. But volumetric fog is quite expensive in terms of your rendering cost. And there are moments in here where that indicate that they are using volumetric fog here. This is just wonderful. This is so fantastic to see, well considered. Again, great bespoke placement of the fog particle systems here. Now, something I've noticed is that these environments, the reason why this game, I know it's going to run well. There's no doubt this game will run well. But the reason why it looks so good and it is running well, and that there's so much detail in the environment, there's so much expressive detail, is that these environments are using pre-baked lighting. Now, in game development, you can either let the scene calculate lighting real time, and then it casts shadows and reflections and lighting every single frame. That's expensive, and I hate to say it, but the Switch is not that strong. The Switch is pretty good at what it does, but it's not that strong. So calculating real-time lighting is quite difficult for the Switch. That's why you see games have low frame rates. So you have two options. You can calculate your shadows real-time, or you can pre-bake them ahead of time. Now, the reason why you would want to calculate lighting ahead of time is if you have a lot of light sources in the scene that are constantly moving. If you have a game, for example, like Silent Hill, where the character has a flashlight and they're constantly moving around, it does not make sense to bake your shadows. Also, there is a memory cost because you then have to save the image resources that tell the game here's where the shadows are. And if you have too much of that, then that negatively impacts the game because you have less memory for other things. And it also means that every time you want to make a change to something, you have to rebake the maps. So it is a challenge in terms of your workflow. You really have to understand what you're doing with your baked shadow maps. I'll point out some examples in here that indicate for a fact that these are baked shadow maps, but baked shadow maps are significantly less costly in terms of your rendering costs. So it makes it so your game can have much better performance. You would want to use baked shadow maps if you know that your light sources are not going to be changing. Say, for example, this is a scene where there isn't going to be a real time of day system. I'm going to discern that now there is no real-time time of day system. There's going to be fixed environments. I'm sure you'll be exploring the environment at different times of day, but those will be scripted and fixed. You won't see the sunlight moving through the scene because there's no reason to. That's not an important part of the game. And so that allows the shadows to be baked. There's a less rendering cost. It does mean that they can actually be higher resolution, more detail, and they can look nicer. So the trade-off for not having real-time shadows is that they look nicer, it's easier to render, and the game will have better performance. What I'm noticing on the shaders here, I've mentioned in my other videos before, is that shaders are basically a program. They're a part of a game that tell the game how to render a piece of geometry. Every single piece of geometry, every particle, every single visual aspect needs a shader. A shader tells the game, how do you render this object? How do you render this piece of geometry? And what I'm seeing here is that we are seeing shaders used that are actually older. They're basically more primitive. That means that there's less calculations going on in terms of lighting, shadows, and reflections. So these are technically less realistic shaders, but because the lighting is baked, we don't really need really advanced shaders when it comes to lighting for calculating reflections. Having advanced shaders means that games can look more advanced, but it doesn't necessarily make it better. And having more advanced shaders means that your game will have worse performance. So here's an example of where the developers are using more advanced shaders, where it matters. There's certain parts of Samus's suit that are calculating reflections. I believe that these are using physically based shaders. They're calculating reflections and lighting in a bit more realistic way, but there's a couple things about it. This looks like a highly optimized physically based shader, to where they might be cutting down on shadow calculations and focusing on the light sources and reflections so that it runs more optimally, so that it's less performance cost. But there are things like this where you can see the imperfections in the glossiness of it that make it feel like there's dirt or smudges on the armor surface here. So this is really fantastic, well implemented. Not everything in the environment has this level of complexity when it comes to the shader, but Samus's suit does have that because it's something that matters. It's an important part of the visual identity of the game here, and this is just so cool. Okay, so you can fake things like this. I'll point out areas where I do strongly believe it's volumetric lighting. It's genuine volumetric lighting, which is again very expensive. But say for example, this area is occluded, and this area back here, so you see these light shafts coming through. You can fake light shafts, and you can fake volumetric lighting with distance fog, which we've had for decades. It's quite basic, but I believe that there are a number of indications that show us that it's a genuine because of the actual complexity of the lighting here, and there's so much interesting detail here. Now it's tough. This trailer is actually tricking me because it's difficult for me to point down a definite answer, and when I do find definite answers, it's having to look very closely, which to me tells me these developers are fantastic. These are masters at what they do. So and there's this is difficult, right? Because the heads-up display, there's such fine, small detail here. If you were to lower the internal resolution of the game so that the game can run better, have a faster frame rate, it would negatively impact the visual elements, and it would look pretty bad. You'd see the pixelation on the helmet here, and it would ruin the illusion. It would take the player out of their immersion. And so they need to prioritize good performance without having to lower the internal resolution. But there's just some quirks here again. I'm not entirely convinced this footage is coming off the Switch, but that may be down to YouTube's compression. I really appreciate the subtle movement of the foliage here to express a sense of life and a sense of wind in the environment. It's just small details like that I really appreciate. This looks disgusting. Please shoot it and get it out of the way. It's gross. But they use these particles to give a sense of depth. As you're moving through, the particles sort of, come close to you, and then they move past. And all of that contributes to feeling like you're in an environment where there's things all around you. There's things close, there's things in the middle ground and things in the background. And that helps you feel immersed in this environment. And that's something that games like the Pokemon titles, Scarlet and Violet, and even Legends ZA, that's something that they still haven't grasped artistically. Scenes like this are quite convincing for volumetric lighting, but there are but you can see they're being occluded here. This isn't just light shafts. We're simulating a sense of density in the atmosphere. The light source comes from up there, and it is creating a light shaft. It's darker here, and it's more clear, and there's no, say for example, there's no density fog that's in the way there. This is something that convinces me that they must be using a volumetric fog. This shot here, as that pulls away, you can see a bit of shimmering of that light shaft behind the creature. That to me tells me that they are actually using a lower resolution internally for the volumetric fog. We'll play it again. You'll see, look behind the creature, you'll see shimmering of that light shaft. See how that shimmers there? So when you are processing volumetric fog, you can either do it at a high resolution, which is, it looks nice, it looks realistic. You can have more definition and expressive detail there, but it's very expensive to render. It has a high rendering cost. You can lower the internal resolution of your volumetric fog, and then it becomes much cheaper to render. You can have a higher frame rate, but it means that you'll have less definition. You'll see shimmering like that. Don't mind that screen tearing. That's just coming from VLC. That's not part of the trailer of the game. The footage that was shown to us was running very nicely. So, and this is a challenge, right? What I'm seeing is displacement shaders, where when these enemies sort of shoot out, you see there's pixel displacement when they shoot out their attacks and particles. That on Switch, that's quite costly. You know, on things like PC and Xbox and PlayStation, that's sort of fine, but having they're displacing the pixels behind them, that's kind of expensive on the Switch. So I'm somewhat impressed that they're just rolling with it for enemy attacks, because you can't really control moment to moment as a developer how many enemy attacks are on screen. Like, obviously you script, oh, there's only going to be 4 or 5 enemies here, but you could have all of those 4 or 5 enemies all shoot an attack out at the exact same time that are expensive to render, you know, that sort of displacement shader. If all of the enemies do that, it's going to hugely negatively impact the frame rate, and that's where you get frame drops and stuttering. That's where all of a sudden, you know, the game drops to like 10 frames a second for a moment. It's because of particle effects like that. Personally, as a developer, I mean, obviously this studio is going to do what they want, because they're brilliant, they know exactly what they're doing. For me personally, because I know that the Switch struggles with this kind of visual element, I would just simplify the shader on that, and I would take out the pixel displacement, and I would just, you know, I would simplify it. I would make the particles easier to render so that during combat it's more free-flowing. I personally don't believe that's going to be an issue here, because these Retro Studios knows exactly what they're doing. So these are developers that don't really need advice. They don't really need to be told what to do. But for me personally, for my games, and if you out there are starting your development journey and you're looking for advice, I would simplify things like that, you know, and I would prioritize other visual elements. So this is where I'm absolutely certain, this is very telling. This to me tells me that the shadows are baked, is that you can see the shadow of the creature. I'm going ahead and expand this so we can just take a closer look at it. You see the shadow of the creature is actually separate from the shadow of the background. If this were real-time lighting, then these would be blended perfectly and you would not see a difference between these. But the creature is casting a real-time shadow. We can see the real-time shadows are hard here. They have hard edges. If they had soft edges, it would have a higher rendering cost. It would negatively impact the frame rate. But you can see that the environmental shadows are actually softer, and you can see that the real-time shadows are darker, and then they sort of add to each other. They're not combining, they're adding to each other here. And that, to me, is 100% clear indication that the environmental shadows are baked. I think it's a great decision. It's just a good decision for them to make, considering all the other requirements of the game here. So let's go ahead and move on through now. And I've mostly discussed, you know, really what I want to talk about, but this is great use of visual elements. Having a lens flare just here in bloom, again, that helps things just look really interesting there. Now let's just have a quick look at that here. You can see moments like this tell me this is true volumetric lighting. Have a look at this light shaft back here. You'll see it flicker and change as the camera angle moves, and that is an indication that this is true volumetric lighting. You can see it changes there. I'm not sure if they've just specified certain areas that use more or less of it for performance consideration, but it still looks quite high resolution to me, and I wouldn't be surprised if the end product, the version that they actually launched, I would not be surprised if the volumetric lighting that we see in that has an actual lower internal rendering resolution than what we see in this trailer, just for performance consideration. Now, this is something that's interesting to me. This clip here, this footage here, this to me looks like it is running on actual Switch hardware, and it looks like they have lowered the internal rendering resolution for the in-game camera here, and then they're using anti-aliasing. So this to me looks like it's running on actual Switch hardware. And there's probably other scenes that are running on Switch. See this, you can see the pixel density is different now. The pixel density is actually lower. and you can see the pixels quite sharply there. And there's a softness to it. So this to me looks like it is actually running on Switch hardware, whereas video earlier did not really look like. You could see the pixels there. There are just certain traits and quirks to actual Switch hardware where a developer would be able to tell if it's actually running on Switch or not. And then this to me looks like it's not running on the Switch. This looks like it's running in their development environment. It's fascinating. You know, they put together bits and pieces. You know, obviously that this is a trailer. They're meant to just show what they're representing, what the game's going to look like, what it's going to feel like. This is cool. This looks like fun. This is neat. Okay. This to me again looks like volumetric fog here, where we have this purple glow halo, and it feels like it's affecting the air particles. So it's strong here, but then it's not strong here. If this were distance fog, it would look like an N64 game if they were using distance fog. So I believe true volumetric fog, which is very expensive. So yeah, like I said, I just have a feeling that it's going to be a lower resolution when they launch it, just to make sure everything runs very smoothly on the Switch. That's what I have a feeling of. This is so cool. This is great. They really know what they're doing. They're combining just enough geometric detail. You know, this is geometry, but the vast majority of this is a texture. They're using texture. They're using normal maps, which is an image file that gives instructions to the game on the bumpiness of something. It can add a sense of detail, and it has a low rendering cost. They're easy for developers to make. And they combine the normal maps with geometry, so you can see geometry here, 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 and here, and everything else is just basically, you know, a PNG that says it should be bumpy here. There's just enough of that to where it does not really negatively impact the performance, and visually, it is expressive. It is telling us what the developers want us to see, to think, and to feel. Really fantastic. Great use of these particle effects. Just adding a sense of depth to the environment. Again, we see that volumetric fog as Samus is in her morph ball. You see those. This is really great, you know. And it's, you know what? In the past, we would just use like a billboard with, you know, a particle effect, basically, to fake light shafts. They can be doing that environment, and there are moments when you do want to fake light shafts just to have it stronger and more expressive. Like, you could fake that there, but I believe it's real in this situation. And this is great. They really understand the use of dynamic range. Something the Pokemon games have not yet. I would really like if Game Freak employed full-time developers that have experience with photography. A lot of experience with photography. Dynamic range is the difference between the dark areas and the light areas in your scene, and they're doing that in basically every single shot that I've seen here. They've considered where are the dark areas, where are the light areas. You can see they're layering the light areas, and they're crossing over like this with diagonals and horizontals and verticals. And then we have the dark areas here. So every scene is just eye-catching. It's interesting, which is not what we're seeing in Scarlet and Violet and Legends ZA. But I still have faith in that. I feel like they're making steps in the right direction. They're really moving, you know, and did a Metroid go into somebody? Did the Metroid go in someone? That's gross. This is cool. I like that. As a gamer, I see that, and all I think is, shoot that. Shoot the enemy weak point. You gotta shoot that. This scene 100% really convinced me that there is volumetric lighting. As you can see the light coming through here, and you can see that it is being occluded. There's a darker area here where the sun is not hitting the light particles or the air particles, but again, there are not really air particles. There isn't really moisture in the atmosphere. There isn't light going through anything. We are just expressing that idea. We are communicating that idea. That concept doesn't exist in games. It's not real. It's all just numbers, but we are visually expressing it so that people can see it and understand it. This looks so cool. And then at the very end here, we have such a cool shot. Let's see it. Let's see the suit. Show us the suit. Show us the suit. Yeah, it's upgrading time. Look at that. Look at the cool details. Look at these cool reflections. Now these would be using a baked reflection. That means that the reflection is not being calculated real time. They're basically, the game takes a snapshot of the environment and it has just one image resource and it's saying, this is your reflective surface, use that to calculate. That is significantly cheaper in terms of the rendering cost. If you're calculating reflections real time of your actual environment, things get very expensive. If you're on PlayStation and PC and Xbox, it's not a big deal. But on the Switch, you need to be more thoughtful that this looks sick. This is sick. So cool. I like this suit. I really like the suit. Awesome. All right. So that is, and you know what? It's maintained the sort of purple, the purple line motif there. I really like that since she's got her psychic powers. They maintain that so well considered. These developers are fantastic. I really like this studio. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed spending some time with me today. Thank you very much for enjoying the video. I'll put a link in the description. I'll put some videos up, but if you'd like to take a look at some of my other videos that are similar to this one, then I'll put them on screen. And if you would like to help the channel because if you enjoyed watching my videos, then I'm going to be honest here, it's more important to me that you take care of yourself. So if you would like to do me a favor, then you can do this. Go ahead and pick up your telephone and call your parents or your brother or your sister or your best friend. Don't send them a text message. Call them, call your parents, tell them you love them, organize to have lunch with them, spend time with them. Call your siblings. Or if you don't have siblings, call a cousin and say, hey, let's spend some time, let's go get some lunch or dinner. And that would be great. That would be a huge help to me. Thanks very much, everyone. Be well. Remember, life is an adventure, so get out there and live.